الرحمن الرحيم إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله وسلم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we'll continue from where we left off last time. So, hadith number 20 today. And this hadith is where the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Ana sayyidu walidi Adama yawm al-qiyamah, wa awwalu man yanshaqu anhu al-qabr, wa awwalu shafi'in, wa awwalu mushaffa'." I will be the leader of the sons of Adam on the day of resurrection. The first one for whom the grave is opened, the first one to intercede, and the first one whose intercession will be accepted. An authentic hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. Now, there are a number of aspects to this hadith, but I will not touch upon all of them. I would like to talk about the biggest aspect and the most misunderstood aspect of this hadith, which is the aspect of intercession. Okay, so types of intercession. There are some intercessions that are specific to the Prophet ﷺ, and there are some that are general. So other than the Prophet ﷺ can also intercede. So what are they? Firstly, let's look at the specific ones. So this is where the Prophet ﷺ will have the privilege from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to intercede for certain people or for at certain time that nobody else, no other creation before him or after him will get. The first one is to start the Day of Judgment. Now this is based on that long hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, wherein he says in part of it that, when the sun is brought very close and everyone's melting under the sun due to their sins, and waiting for the Day of Judgment to start for forever, people are not able to handle it. So they go to Adam alayhi salam first and say, you're the first one that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. Can you intercede for us and ask Allah to start the Day of Judgment? Adam alayhi salam says, I'm not, he remembers a sin that he did. So he says, I'm not fit for it. Go to Nuh alayhi salam. And Nuh alayhi salam, they make the same request. He says he remembers what he did when he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about his son, for him to be forgiven, or implied that. So then he says, no, I'm not fit for it. Go to Ibrahim alayhi salam. And then Ibrahim alayhi salam sends the people to Musa alayhi salam. And Musa alayhi salam sends the people to Isa alayhi salam. At every time they're asking the Prophet that certain Prophet to ask Allah to start the proceedings of Day of Judgment, because it's unbearable. So then finally Isa alayhi salam sends the people to Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Now when the people come to him, that's all of us, when we're going to come to him, he will say that he is the one fit for it. He's the one who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has appointed for this reason. So then the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam will ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a long hadith, it's got other details that I'm leaving out. But he will ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to start the Day of Judgment. Now just imagine how horrible that's going to be, that people are asking for the Day of Judgment to start. Many people will know or have an idea that they're doomed, and yet they'll want that judgment to start because of what they're going through. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from the torments of that day. And someday, inshallah, I'll cover different aspects of that day, especially the 7 categories of people the Prophet ﷺ mentioned who will be given a shade on that day when there is no other shade except the shade provided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So we should always make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us one of those 7 categories and try to work towards that as well. So that's the first specific intercession by the Prophet ﷺ. Second one is for the people of paradise to enter paradise. So like when everything is finished for the good people, for the true believers, and they get to the Jannah's doors is going to be closed. So that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you know, through the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, like he'll make intercession and the doors will open and the people of paradise will enter the paradise, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us all amongst those. Ameen. The third intercession is an interesting one. The Prophet ﷺ will intercede on behalf of his uncle Abu Talib. Abu Talib, that uncle who he didn't have any enmity towards the Prophet ﷺ. In fact, to the contrary, he helped the Prophet ﷺ all throughout his life. Even before his prophethood and after his prophethood, Abu Talib was amazing, a great supporter. But at the last minute, he did not accept Islam, even though he knew it was the truth. But for some like unacceptable reasons, he did not accept Islam, and he died upon kufr. So that means he's deserving of hellfire. But then the Prophet ﷺ will be permitted to make intercession for Abu Talib, such that instead of being in the pits of the hellfire, he will be at the upper or the least punishment aspect of it. Okay, now, what is this least punishment in the hellfire? You might think, okay, that's not so bad. Well, the Prophet ﷺ described it. He said he'll be made to wear shoes or sandals of fire, which will make his brain boil. So he's going to be made to wear shoes or sandals of fire, where do you wear that? At your feet. But it's going to be so hot that the brain, which is on top of the body, that's going to boil because of it. So imagine how terrible that is and what the rest of the body is going to be facing. And that is the least punishment of hellfire. So whenever we're making dua, ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from the hellfire and to forgive us completely. We cannot even handle the hellfire for even a second. Remember that, not even for a fraction of a second. So these three intercessions are specific to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, what about the other category, the general intercession? So this is by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and others, such as the angels and the martyrs and the kids who died young, some believers for others, and so on. Okay, so these are general intercessions, not specific to the Prophet ﷺ. So what is the first one of these? For Muslims who go to hellfire to be taken out from it. Now you might think, hang on, all right, that's not so bad, so we get to be taken out. But it is bad. Just think about it. If we can't handle the hellfire for even a fraction of a second, then how are you going to go there and wait for some intercession to happen to be taken out? It's just not, it's not bearable. It's not imaginable. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from something like that. And we have to work towards that we don't go to Jannah via hellfire for a while. You have to work hard such that we get our sins forgiven, we're deserving of that, and we're deserving of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, by which He will make us enter paradise straight away. The second type of general intercession is intercession for people who deserve hellfire to not enter it. So the first one is who are already in hellfire to be taken out. This one is they're deserving to go there, but then to be not put into it. Now, even this one is a terrifying thing if you're on the receiving end of it, where you're facing, what seems like a certain hellfire entry, and hellfire is you're going to be seeing it, and it's going to be absolutely horrible. But then some few people, they will be interceded for, and they will not enter hellfire. The final general one is intercession for some of the believers who deserve paradise to raise their ranks in it. So they're in Jannah, for example, but the intercession for them, such that their ranks are raised even more. Okay, so these are some of the general ones. Now, one of the intercessions that many people kind of like rely on is, or believe in, is the intercession by someone who has memorized the Quran, Hafidh al-Quran, for his family or her family. Now, the scholars said that there's nothing authentic there. Okay, They say there's nothing authentic there. But like, for example, the famous one is that the Hafid can take 70 of his family members to Jannah or intercede for them and so on. The scholars said that hadith is not authentic. So remember one very clear thing. There is no ticket to Jannah. There's no free card to Jannah, free pass to Jannah. Okay, we all have to work very hard. Now, if you've worked hard and you've got, let's say, 1, 2, 3 kids that have memorized the Quran, you've really encouraged them and helped them and they memorized. Maybe you have also memorized, okay? All of that is good. Maybe you're a Quran teacher, maybe you're doing dawah, whatever. All of that is good. It's excellent. We should be doing that. But none of that is a sure ticket. It's not a pass to Jannah, a guaranteed Jannah. Nobody will know till the Day of Judgment happens, okay? So we find out whether deeds have been accepted or not accepted and what quality they were when the deeds are weighed, you know, the good deeds are weighed against the bad deeds. So work to get your kids memorizing Quran, for you to memorize Quran, for you to do good deeds, them to do good deeds, and so on. But that's not a guarantee. That's not a ticket to Jannah. Now, so we now know the type of intercessions, but will everyone get it? I wish that were the case, but that's not the case, okay? So there are some conditions for intercession. Pay attention to these because people are making grave mistakes because of this particular aspect. Firstly, first condition for intercession is Allah has to be pleased with the intercessor, the one doing the interceding, okay? So Allah has to be pleased with that person. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He's not happy or He's not satisfied with kufr, He doesn't approve it and so on. So it's got to be a believer, a good believer, with the one doing the interceding. Second one, Allah has to be pleased with the one who will benefit from the intercession, okay? So the one who somebody else is going to say, oh Allah, forgive that person, or Allah, don't make him into hellfire, or Allah, take him out of hellfire. So Allah has to be pleased to a certain level with that person. And finally, this is another interesting one, Allah has to allow intercession between them to happen. So do you see, Allah has to allow. So it's not independent of Allah. It's not like a person is interceding for another person independent of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No, Allah has to allow that to happen. He has to approve, Allah has to approve of both parties, like in terms of like the satisfactory people, and then He has to allow that intercession to happen. Now, why is this important? Because if you think about like our Indian subcontinent and other people, what do? They go to, for example, who they claim are pious people who have died. They go to their graves and ask them, you know, intercede for me and so on and so forth. Or even someone who's alive, they say this sort of thing. But who controls intercession? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala controls it. So it's futile for us to ask anybody else for them to intercede for us, because everything from the start till the end about intercession belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who can benefit, who can intercede, and for them to happen between them, Allah has to approve. So that means we need to turn to Allah for Him to accept, for Him to grant us intercession and so on, or for intercession or for somebody else to benefit us. It has to go through Allah, through nobody else. Now, think about it. What does intercession mean? Now, we know the word in English, but what does it mean in this particular context, Islamic context? So basically, look, is it like this? Is it like someone, you know, does not deserve Jannah at all, and then along comes an angel or a pious person and is able to take that person who does not deserve Jannah and take them to Jannah? Can that ever happen? No, it cannot. That's impossible. So basically what intercession is, okay, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing mercy to the one being interceded for, but indirectly, He's allowing somebody else to intercede for that person. So from the start till finish, it is the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But sometimes it is a direct mercy where Allah will just forgive the person and make them enter Jannah. Sometimes it's going to be via intercession of somebody else. But Allah is allowing that, which means Allah is showing mercy firstly and lastly to that person, but through somebody else on the Day of Judgment. Why so? Because it makes that intercessor, it raises their ranks, doesn't it? It raises their ranks that they were a good person and deserving of Allah's pleasure and deserving of being permitted to intercede. So it's an extra raising of their rank. So this is actually what's happening. So intercession is not independent of Allah. Just remember that. So seek it from Allah. Now, by the way, in all of what I'm mentioning and all of these conditions and things like that, there are direct proofs from the Quran and Hadith for these things. Okay, so I haven't firstly brought them up for myself. I'm getting it from the scholars who are providing proofs for every single one of these. But that's for a later time, if ever we get into detailed explanation of these things. Okay, but at the moment, we're trying to take them at a superficial, at an introductory kind of a level. Okay. Now, related to intercession, there's a very important question that we must understand. And what stems from it is incredibly important. Okay, so pay attention. And that is, where are the parents of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Are they in heaven or hell? This is very important. So we know that both of them died before the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam became a prophet. So there was no Islam. And we know that 99% of the people at that time were not upon the correct religion of Isa alayhi salam, which means they were into shirk, which means they were non-Muslim, which means if they died like that, then those people were were forever in hellfire. Now that includes the parents of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now this comes as a shock to many, many, many people. How can the parents of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the greatest person ever, okay, how can his parents be in hellfire? Well, I'm not making this up. This is the Prophet ﷺ informing about his parents himself. Okay, so both of his parents are in hellfire. So the greatest person could not save them, could not intercede for them. So if he cannot do anything for them, then who are we? So we need to, we're on our own. We have to work hard. We have to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala properly. So yes, both of his parents, the father and mother, in hellfire. So now, where are the proofs here? So regarding the father of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a man said to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, "Ya Rasulullah, where is my father?" So this man is asking him, "Where is my father?" Because maybe Allah has given him some knowledge. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, "In hell." Now that man, you can imagine how he must have felt, extremely sad. He turns around and starts walking away. So the Prophet ﷺ, seeing that, calls him back and says to him, he says, "My father and your father are in hell." A clear hadith, my father and your father are in hell, he says to that person. May Allah protect us all from it. Now, regarding the mother of the Prophet ﷺ, he said this hadith, "I asked my Lord," so this is the Prophet ﷺ speaking, he said, "I asked my Lord for permission to pray for forgiveness for my mother, but he did not, yani Allah did not give me permission. And I asked him," which is he's saying, "I asked Allah for permission to visit her grave, and he gave me permission." So the scholars said the only category of people that you cannot seek forgiveness for are the clear non-Muslims, the clear disbelievers. They cannot get the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all. Dua for them is useless. Just like the dua for the father of Ibrahim alayhi salam, the son of Nuh alayhi salam, and so on and so forth. Useless. So, and both of these hadith are authentic hadith in Sahih Muslim. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam's own parents are in hellfire, and he could not do anything for them. So that shows that everything belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the start to the end. We have to work hard. We have to do good deeds. We have to stay away from haram deeds. We have to do tawbah 100 times a day, more than 100 times a day. We have to do dhikr. We have to pray. We have to read Quran and everything. And in fact, in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned clearly regarding his daughter, Fatima. He said, "Ask me whatever you want now, for I cannot benefit you in front of Allah at all." So he clearly specified even to his own daughter as well. that I can only give you stuff in this life, whatever you want, but not anything in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I cannot benefit you. Now, this is a very big issue for many people. The reason being, many people are relying on this. They're thinking like this is definitely a fallback plan. That if I'm bad, no worries. The Prophet ﷺ, he will protect us and he will take us to Jannah, no problem. We won't get to Hellfire. But if he cannot do anything for his own mother and father, who are we? We're so far away. So we need to work hard such that we die as Muslims, we die as believers. There's no free pass to Jannah, as I mentioned, okay? Now, let's get to hadith number 21. The Prophet ﷺ said, فَإِنَّهُ مَنْ يَعِشْ مِنْكُمْ يَرَى اخْتِلَافًا كَثِيرًا. Whoever among you lives like long will see many differences. وَإِيَّاكُمْ وَمُحْدَثَاتِ الْأُمُورِ. Beware of newly invented matters in religion. فَإِنَّهَا ضَلَالَةٌ. For it is misguidance. Yani the newly invented matters are misguidance. And then he goes on to say, whoever among you lives to see that, let him adhere to my sunnah and the way of the rightly guided khulafa. Adhere to it and cling tightly to it. This is what the Prophet ﷺ has said. Now again, this is one of those really important hadith where the Prophet ﷺ is telling us the methodology that we need to live by. What do we do, like for example, when differences occur? And what do we do in terms of newly innovated matters and so on? So now, a lot can be said about the topic of bid'ah, and I have mentioned this long time ago as well, like in the second class when we talked about the first hadith of intention. I mentioned that, and I think a lot of people here might not have been there at the time, so I think I might repeat that part of it. So it's like this. Every deed has to meet two conditions for it to be accepted. One of them is intention, for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second condition is that it has to be in accordance with the guidance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So whatever you're doing, it has to match the guidance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in these 6 things. Now, sometimes not all 6 things will match. Sometimes whatever matches, you have to abide by it. So what do we mean by that? Time. So if an act of worship is time-bound, you cannot do it outside of that time. You cannot pray Fajr outside of the Fajr time. You cannot pray Isha, like in the summer months, it's very late in Melbourne, like 10:30, for example. You cannot say, look, I need to get up for work tomorrow morning. Let me pray Isha nice and early at 9 o'clock and go to sleep. No, you cannot, because Isha is time-bound. So you have to stick to that time. Secondly, place. So if an act of worship is place-bound, you have to stick to that place. So Tahiyatul Masjid is meant to be in Masjid. It cannot be elsewhere. Tawaf has to be around the Kaaba. It cannot be elsewhere. So it's place-bound. Quantity. So if an act of worship is quantity-bound, then you cannot increase and decrease unless there's specific permission. So like prayer is the greatest deed in Islam after a person becomes Muslim. But you can't say like, okay, Fajr is only 2 rakat, let me increase the Fajr to 3 or 4 rakat. You can't, because it has a quantity associated with it. So you can't just bring about something. Fourth one is type. So if an act of worship has a type associated with it, then you cannot change that. So aqiqah is meant to be with a certain animal. Now you can't say, look, I've had a baby and my circumstances are strained, so I can't afford what I'm supposed to give. So let me do an aqiqah because I want the reward of an aqiqah. Let me do it with a chicken. You can't, because that's got a type associated with a certain type of animal. So you can't change that. It'll not be aqiqah. The fifth one is how, the method, the manner. So you can't say, for example, let's say you've got like a backache or knee pain, and you're saying, look, Fajr prayer has 2 rak'ah, and that means it's got 2 rukus and it's got 4 sajdas. So you can't say, look, I've got backache, so what I'll do is I'll do all of my sajdas in the first rak'ah, for example, or I'll delay them all for the second rak'ah when I sit down. You can't do that because it's got a manner to it that you can't break. And finally, reason, which means reason for an act of worship. So now there are many things in Islam that we're supposed to be doing, but you can't bring about a new reason that didn't come either explicitly or implicitly from the Prophet ﷺ. So like, for example, you know, how people get together to do Quran Khani, which is everyone reads Quran when someone dies. Okay, so this sort of thing. Now, Quran recitation is an excellent act of worship. Okay, it can never be done too much. That's how great it is. Okay, it's excellent. But the reason for it would not be right, because the Prophet ﷺ never did it. And in his time, hundreds of companions died. And the great Khulafa after him never did it. And at that time as well, hundreds and thousands of people died. They never did anything of that sort. So the reason for an act of worship must also match. Like I said, whenever you're doing something, pay attention to these 6 aspects. Now, there are some things that are so horrible that none of these 6 places match. The best example I can think about is Mawlid al-Nabawi, celebrating the birthday of the Prophet ﷺ. It is wrong, but you can't say like the time is wrong, or the place is wrong, or the quantity is wrong, or the type is wrong, or the how is wrong, or the reason is wrong. No, the whole deed itself is wrong. It's not like the Prophet ﷺ did it and you've got the time wrong, or the place wrong, or the how wrong. No, the deed doesn't exist in Islam. So with that deed, all things are wrong with it. From the foundation, it is incorrect. Okay? Now, this basically, you can see where it came from. This is like studying the Sharia, studying all the aspects of acts of worship. You can see this is where it came from. And Aisha radiallahu anha famously reported that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, whoever innovates something in this affair of ours, which is Islam, will have it rejected. So it's not sufficient for you to say, oh, my intention is to please Allah. No, you got to also match this guidance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Some people have invalid objections. They say, look, Coke wasn't there at that time, so drinking it should be an innovation. Or there were no cars in those days, so isn't it an innovation to drive now? And the answer is no, these are invalid objections. Simply speaking, because it shows that people have got little understanding, such people have got little understanding of this hadith and other hadith, because these are not acts of worship. You don't worship Allah by drinking Coke. You don't worship Allah by driving a car. What you're doing is you're going to the masjid using a car, or you're trying to stay fit by Coke or whatever, except like Coke might kill you. That's a different story because of like the sugar content, but let's come back to the car. Okay. So you're not worshiping Allah by driving the car. You're worshiping Allah by going to the masjid, but because everything is far away, you go by car. So that's why it's an invalid objection to come up with these things. We're talking about acts of worship. They need to match the guidance of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay. Now, finally, I'd like to finish off by saying, look, I have a Telegram channel, Purify Soul, that I think a number of you might know about. So please go to this link and you can join it. I send, generally speaking, daily reminders that you can, inshallah, benefit from and share with those, with your family and your friends, inshallah. Okay. So what I'll do now is I'll just see if there are any quick questions that people have asked. Someone asked about Abdul Muttalib, the Prophet ﷺ's grandfather. He was obviously also a non-Muslim, so he's not going to be going to Jannah at all. Someone's asking, if the Prophet ﷺ's parents were non-Muslim, then what about naming our kids with those names? The thing is, the Prophet ﷺ informed that the most beloved name to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Abdullah, which was his father's name. So keep it from that perspective, not because his father's name was Abdullah, but because Allah likes that name, Abdullah. Now with Amina, the thing is, Amina means what? Female believer. So don't keep it because it was the name of the Prophet's mother. She's not a role model, but because maybe from the meaning perspective, it's fine. Birthday celebrations, someone's asking me about birthday celebrations. The scholars of our time where this has been invented, they said that that sort of thing is not allowed because it's like, it's resembling Eid. Because Eid is something that recurs as a celebration. So the birthday celebrations are resembling Eid, and that's why it is not permissible, they say. So please stay away from things like that. We're more and more, subhanAllah, we're more and more following the ways of those who do not believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. As the Prophet ﷺ predicted that we would do that, and we're doing it. Someone's asking regarding prayer beads. Again, this is one of those, look, the Prophet ﷺ did dhikr. And they were similar to beads in those days, but he didn't use them. He used his hands and his fingers. So we should try and restrict ourselves to the way the Prophet ﷺ did. Okay. A couple of people have in the chat put the link to the purified soul. That's also on the screen. It's also in the chat. Someone's saying people don't celebrate the Prophet ﷺ's birthday as a form of worship. Now that is, I hope the questionnaire is not serious, because people do celebrate that. They're saying we're showing love of the Prophet ﷺ. Now loving the Prophet ﷺ is one of the greatest acts of worship. So it is. They're thinking they're doing, they're showing their love for the Prophet. So it is an act of worship, but it's an incorrect act of worship. We're supposed to show the like love of the Prophet ﷺ by following him. So everyone here who's a parent, I ask you a simple question, okay? If your kid comes to you, like you tell your kid, okay, do this, they don't do it, they do something else. Then you say for something else, do that, and they don't do it, they do something else. And a third thing, and a fourth thing. And then it says at the end of the day, Mom, Dad, I love you. Do you accept that? You said, no, if you love me, you would do what I said. That's exactly the case with the Prophet ﷺ. We love him, we follow him the way he wants us to follow him, not inventing ways. And like, as I mentioned a couple of sessions ago, the viral message that was going around recently of some person had a dream, some scholar supposedly had a dream of the Prophet ﷺ, and he told him the solution to coronavirus is this and this and this dhikr so many hundreds of times and so on. Islam is not based on dreams. Okay, coronavirus is nothing compared to like some of the problems like even the companions had after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, and never once did he come to them and tell them the solution to their problems. Okay, so who are we? And there's lots of other dangers with the celebrating of the Prophet's birthday, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is not the time to get into it. Someone invites you for a birthday party, don't go obviously, and tell them they should not be doing it. Okay, someone's asking, this is, let's make this the last question. Where the hadith is, where it says about Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's parents, I put it up before. Maybe this person came late. They're both in Sahih Muslim. Okay, authentic hadith. And by the way, on that same topic, there are a number of hadith, or some hadith, that claim or that the Prophet ﷺ's parents were brought back to life by Allah, then they believed after his death, and then they died as Muslims. Now the scholars of hadith have unanimously said that those hadith are extremely weak or fabricated, one or the other. Okay, so there's something that not to be relied upon. Okay, now people have come up with them again because it's very difficult to accept that the Prophet ﷺ's parents are in fire. But look, that's the Prophet ﷺ. He loved his parents more than we love his parents, and he's telling us about his own parents. Okay, all right. Jazakumullah khair. Inshallah, the next session will be Wednesday night at the same time, 8:30 p.m. Melbourne time. Inshallah. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.